Good evening, everyone. Live from our studio here in North Minneapolis. This is Bright Lights, our weekly get together where we meet and talk with achievers and people who have achieved a certain amount of success in various areas of human endeavor. And we share their light, their bright light with you, our audience. Today, our guest is going to be Catrin Wigfall, a policy fellow at the Center for American Experiment. Catrin is in an area that is so important to me, and that's the area of education. And as most of you know, that I have talked about four fundamental things to get to the root causes of a lot of issues facing our communities. That's business development that leads to generational wealth, or to put it simply, put money in people's pockets. Secondly, quality education. Thirdly, rebuilding the family, strong families. I believe in that, strong two-parent families, as a matter of fact. And then just a return to our foundation of faith. And so education is one of those four pillars that I preach about a lot. And I don't even mean to use the word preach, but I guess I do. And that's why I'm excited to have this conversation tonight. We're going to talk about things like the achievement gaps and what's going on with this critical race theory and its impact on education and in fact in the corporate world and the government world, why that's either good or bad. And to be honest with you, I think it's a bad thing. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But before we go there and bring our guest on, this past Sunday was Father's Day. I had my son, my youngest son, who's here in the Twin Cities. My oldest son is out in California, Hollywood, he's breaking into the entertainment industry, and a professor at UCLA and all that good stuff. And my youngest son is here with my grandson, and we just had a great time over the weekend celebrating Father's Day. My little grandson has such a wonderful spirit about him. Kind of reminds me in a way of my dad, who had a wonderful and strong spirit about him. So I spent some time thinking about how my dad used to relate to my sons and all the little things he used to say and all the amusement and joy he got out of my sons, who was his grandsons, and how I'm currently doing that with my grandson. I guess it's called the family circle. And I'd like to take just a minute to recognize my dad for all the impact and wonderful things he had as far as my life is concerned that he gave me. My dad was someone who never complained. He never cursed. In fact, I was in my 40s when I thought about it. I had never even heard my dad argue or raise his voice in my life. He never showed any fear or any anger. And I love the fact that we bonded out in the woods hunting, or gathering woods for the fireplace, working on his car, remodeling homes, out in the garden. Those were the type of things that we bonded over, and he spent a lot of time sharing life lessons and knowledge and wisdom with me. One of the most memorable things growing up and cherished experiences, just the way my dad would turn to me and say, "Son, this," or "Son, that." And even now, I try to do the same thing with my sons. And let me tell you something, people. There is nothing in this world as precious for me as being in the same home with my father, him being there every day, being my role model, being my hero, and looking at me and saying, "Son, this and son, that." And if we think we can replace that with some type of government program or some type of nonprofit program, we're kidding ourselves. And if we don't see the connection between fathers not being part of their children's lives, fathers not being in the homes, and I'm going to take it even further, fathers not marrying the mothers of their children. In fact, it reminds me of something that John Wooden says, and I agree with. The best thing a father can give to their children is to love their mother, and not only love her and marry her and stay with them and raise these children together. So that's my thing. That's my recognition of my father. That's the role he played in my life. I'll end it by saying everybody called him man, even though he didn't talk softly and carry the big stick. Everybody call him man. Even my mom, except down south, the colloquial way of saying it is Maine, and his name was Maine, and Maine Sylvester. So this is in recognition for my late father and all the great things he did for me, and how he really taught me how to be a man. So, as I mentioned earlier, our guest tonight is Catrin Wigfall. We'll be talking about education and getting into this whole critical race theory and curriculum changes and things that they're planning on doing. We're going to talk about the educational achievement gap and a lot of other things of interest to parents and our citizens out there. Hey, Catrin, welcome to Bright Lights.
I'm doing great, Lacey. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and before we get started here, I was talking about Father's Day, and I heard from a little birdie here that your husband, this time next year, will be celebrating Father's Day with a new addition to the family. Why don't you tell us about that, Catrin, before we get started on the less serious stuff?
Yes, so I'm currently about 6 months pregnant. We have our first baby joining us this September, a baby boy. So my husband joked this past weekend that we weren't going to celebrate Father's Day until next year after he's changed a few diapers and had some sleepless nights and that sort of thing. He doesn't feel like he's really put in the work yet. So
and he hasn't put in the work yet. You're right. He got to earn this celebration. And you mentioned might be a September baby. Let's hope that he's born on September 2nd. That's a very special day. And you know why, Catrin? Because that's my birthday. Yeah. So
I'm all for it, Lacey.
Okay. So congratulations again. Let's start talking about you and what you do in your background. First of all, let's talk about where you're from, Catrin, your family growing up and your influences growing up and things that may have predicted that you'd be doing what you're doing today.
Sure, absolutely. So I actually grew up in a rural farm community in Wisconsin, and I graduated from high school in Minnesota, and then I went all the way out to California for college, and then jumped across the country to Washington, D.C., and spent some time on Capitol Hill and working out there. And then back to the other side of the country where I taught 5th grade general education and 6th grade Latin in Phoenix, Arizona at a Title I charter school, and then popped back into California to work on education policy at the California Policy Center before coming back to Minnesota and convincing my boyfriend at the time he wanted to see if our relationship was going to go anywhere. So when I got the job at American Experiment in Minnesota, he said, well, I guess I'm moving to Minnesota. So he left California, moved to Minnesota, and only really regrets moving here about 5 days out of the year when the winter is really terrible, but otherwise very much enjoys it. So
well, you let him know when he's complaining about the winters being terrible, and Father Day is a theme somewhat here, that the weekend my oldest son was born, it was minus 81 degrees wind chill. Yep. So you just remind him of that. The other thing is that you mentioned you were born in Wisconsin. Does that mean you are a cheesehead, Catrin?
You know, I was wondering, Lacey, if that question was
of course it's going to come up.
I am unabashedly a Packer fan, and the president of American Experiment, John Hinderaker, has 2 Packer fans actually in the office. A fellow Wisconsinite. So now whenever we're interviewing anyone, that is actually an interview question because he does not want any more Packer fans in the office.
Yeah, sound like he already has his quota of cheeseheads there. But I want you to know this, and this is true. They can get on your nerves and stuff like that, but I have a certain fondness for any group of people who can come out in public and sit around with a piece of cheese on their heads. And for some reason, that just touches me. So you mentioned
heavy. They're heavy, by the way, too.
They are heavy? Okay, yes. I thought they were little foam things or something. They were light. Oh, they're heavy. Yes. Oh, I'm even more impressed now. So they'll be even more endearing to me. So you talked about moving around. You talked about, I heard you talk about being in Washington, D.C. And as I looked into some of your background, I saw you had some a BA degree in political science and government. And I'm assuming that for a person to major in political science and government, they have to have a career in that field in mind. Am I correct in that?
You are correct, yes. So I did major in political science. I was actually anticipating going to law school once I received my bachelor's degree. And then my time in DC and talking to lawyers out there, they were a bit jaded and they convinced me maybe I should pursue a different profession. And so I did not think that I would ever have any classroom experience. But what's neat is I come from a family of teachers. And so when I started teaching in Arizona and explained my background and my story, it made sense to people that I went into teaching. But for me, that was never on the radar.
Well, me and my family spent some time out in the D.C. area. Wonderful city in a lot of ways, but as I grew older, I had a different perspective of it. So when we get together, we'll exchange some DC stories and how everything went out there. Uh, Currently, you are a policy fellow at the Center of American Experiment. Why don't you tell us what is the Center for American Experiment, and
Yeah,
then go ahead. Uh-huh.
that's a great question. We get it often. So in a nutshell, we are a nonpartisan public policy organization, also called a think tank, and we were founded in 1990 by Mitch Pearlstein. And so as a public policy organization, we do a lot of research and writing on policy issues in Minnesota, ranging from the economy to education to healthcare, the family, employee freedom, state and local governments, you name it. We're working to make these policy issues better in Minnesota. And so we craft and propose solutions to these issue areas that really focus on key principles like the free enterprise, limited government, personal responsibility, and government accountability.
I love all those things. And I should mention, and we'll hit on some of these areas that I was looking at some of the things that you care about, included children, civil rights and social action, education, which we already going to get into, health, human rights, of course, politics, poverty alleviation, and social service. So we're gonna let's just let our audience know that you are a person of wide areas of concerns and things like that that you worked in. So that's great. Okay, so let's dive into some of the. Well, first of all, before we go there, uh, who is your audience for all these policy positions and papers and things that you're writing? I'm assuming that some of them are legislators, but and yeah, and so give us an idea of the audiences that you're intended to reach with these public policies.
Sure. No, yeah, absolutely. We legislators are part of our audience. We do testify before legislative committees, but we also pride ourselves in the fact that thousands of individual Minnesotans across the state support our work. So, as a nonprofit, we are donor funded. And so, these Minnesotans are who we want to be kind of like a sounding board for on policy issue areas, both Metro and Greater Minnesota. So our audience then, we also reach through op-eds in newspapers and magazines. We appear on radio and television news programs, hold town meetings, grassroots advertising campaigns. So yes, we want to share our ideas with legislators and policymakers, but we also want to share them with Minnesotans and equip them with the knowledge and resources that they need to understand what's going on in the state and efforts that we're doing to make the state better.
Can the audience hear us now? Okay. Like we're still live. Okay. Hey, that's live TV, folks. And I was just asking my uh, audio engineer here, are we back on? And he said we are. By the way, this is about the third time I was telling him in the last week that power has gone out uh, at our office place here. And I don't know what's going on, but normally it's been out. That's been time was 4 or 5 hours. It will be out of 8 hours, 10 hours. So we've been lucky. So, all right, Catrin, Wonderful.
We'll get through this, right? We will talk about these important issues
We
tonight.
just love live TV here, and technical difficulties. Now we're hoping our audience hung in there with us, and because we were getting ready to get into some good stuff. Okay, so we were getting ready to get into some of all these brilliant ideas and things that you're sharing, and all the solutions to all the issues out here. And one of the first one I want to touch on is just the whole school choice issue. And I was reading somewhere about the widespread support, and it only makes sense. And I want our audience to know is that I'm a proponent of school choice, and we'll get into our current public school system. I don't understand why we keep expecting for these people to solve the achievement gap. They just don't have what it takes. I don't care how many degrees they have, how many years of experience. When you got a governor who I call our educator in chief, he's actually hiring the head of the union to be over the Minnesota Department of Education. And anyone who really understands what's going on in our public schools know that the union, the teachers union, they're a big part of the problem. But and I'm up front about that, keeping it 100. But tell us about your work in school choice and what the polls show out there and those type of things.
Yeah, we really see not only in Minnesota, but statewide or nationwide too, that school choice is on the rise. It's popular. Parents are considering alternative learning environments for a variety of reasons, whether it's the fact that COVID closed down their school and public schools remained closed, and distance learning just didn't work out well for their student, whether it's curriculum concerns, they're seeing what their students are or aren't learning in class. So families are really exploring other learning environments for a variety of reasons. And we have focused on school choice at American Experiment for the past 30 years and what we call real school choice, which should
Mm-hmm.
include private and religious schools. And so we're really seeing popularity for school choice on the rise. There are polls that confirm that. And we're realizing that families are desperate for these options, but can't always access them, right? There are sometimes barriers in place that prevent them from leaving their neighborhood school district, whether that's a financial barrier, transportation issues, that sort of thing. And so this past legislative session, there was a provision in the Senate education bill called education savings accounts that would have allowed families to access a different learning environment than their public school and use the dollars that they pay as taxpayers to cut the cost or help with the cost of that. And there were a lot of great efforts to promote that, and there were great organizations that rallied behind it. I think of the Exodus, MN, and there were press conferences that were held, and a lot of attention was drawn to the fact that parents want this. This whole provision was parent led. And unfortunately, we found out last night that it did not make it into the final version of the education omnibus bill. However, it has started the conversation, and we will continue to put pressure on state leaders to expand educational opportunity in Minnesota because, as you mentioned, test scores and our achievement gap just show that not every student thrives in the same learning environment, and they shouldn't be limited to a one size fits all model.
Well, a couple of things you mentioned there. First is the COVID. And, I get around the community quite a bit, and I heard a lot of complaints about the public school system just not meeting their needs and requirements. And on a personal level, I saw what some of the policies, the impact, it was negative impact it was having on my grandson. And that's what really got me even more interested in it. But you also mentioned Exodus, Minnesota. And, I'm just curious about things most of the time. And I did a little peep work on Exodus, Minnesota. And what caught my attention is that there's a lot of Black moms out there involved in Exodus, Minnesota. Exodus, Minnesota. I don't know whether they found it or what, but if you really know what's going on, and anyone who really knows what's going on, it would not surprise you that there are Black mothers out there that are saying we got to do better, and we're looking for different choices than what we're being offered now. So tell us a little bit more about Exodus, Minnesota, its history, and its makeup. Because, like I say, I just saw a lot of Black mothers out there in Exodus, Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. From my understanding, it's a fairly recent organization that was started by five Black moms who are committed to educational excellence for all students, regardless of what they look like, regardless of what school setting that's in. And they all have children. Many of them have children in the Minneapolis and St. Paul public school system. And through COVID and even before that, they realized that their students' needs weren't being met and that their student needed to access a different learning environment. And so they've been really pushing for school choice as a nonpartisan issue. I love that they have signs that we've used at school choice rallies saying, united for choice. Choice means hope. Parents should be empowered to make the decision for their child that is best. And so they have really come together and been the face of this push for expanding educational opportunity, and of course are supported by hundreds of other parents from a variety of backgrounds and communities. Other organizations, American Experiment like ours, has been proud to partner with them. And it's unfortunate that state leadership has refused to acknowledge their voices and even have a meeting with them about what they're asking for. Because they're really pleading and begging state leadership, and no parent should have to beg for their child to be able to get an excellent education, and that's where they're at right now. And so it's really important and urgent that state leadership considers what these parents are asking, because children cannot wait, and
Okay.
they have been waiting for too long. And the longer we wait, the more the students who fall through the cracks, and these parents want better for their children and other children as well.
So, Catherine, would it be safe to assume that part of the state leadership, quote unquote, that refused to meet with these moms uh, was indeed our educator in chief, Governor Walsh? Am I safe to assume that? Well, and it does not surprise any of us that uh, a person like Governor Walsh, who appoints the president of the teachers union as head of the MDE, would not want to meet with anyone who want better choices in education to compete with them. And, look, I hear a lot of excuses why people aren't for choice. But what I say to, especially people in education, what I say to them, well, look, let's give people choice and prove to us that you can do better than them. What are you afraid of? If what you're saying is true, at the end of a few years, we will say, oh, well, no doubt you're right. The public school system is the best place. And we do need to keep this monopoly, this unperforming monopoly in education with our children. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that he would not meet with you at all. And the other thing is that I tell people, look, we've heard all these excuses. We need more money. We need smaller class size. And I'm going to try to keep this at PG-13 level at least. And we all know it's a bunch of poppycock. I mean, it's just a bunch of, come on, give me a break. And I'm telling our audience out there right now, you can give these people $1 billion, and there's certain parties, certain of our children that they would not educate because they just do not understand what it takes to educate these children, and their whole type of liberal philosophy on education and the way they look at our community and our children. Uh, that's the biggest hurdle, I think. So anyway, I'm not gonna get too much on my soapbox with the education. Let's talk about the achievement gap. Do you have any numbers that kind of quantify the achievement gap? Because my background is engineering, and I always start off with numbers and data and apply some logic to come to some conclusions as far as how we address these issues. But give us some type of numbers that quantify this achievement gap,
Yeah,
Catherine.
absolutely. And I would be remiss to not say that a lot of all of the numbers that I'm mentioning are through publicly available data, and viewers can learn more about it through my education report, Allergic to Accountability, which is available at americanexperiment.org. But it's important to note, when we're talking about Minnesota's achievement gap, it's not just the achievement gap between white and black students or white and other students of color. That obviously is there, but there's also a gap based on income. So a gap
Mm-hmm.
between students from low income backgrounds and then their wealthier peers. So if we look at the test results from our 2019 statewide tests, which are the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments, the MCAs, we see in fourth grade reading a 35 percentage point achievement gap in proficiency between white and Black students. And these achievement gaps are also just as wide and concerning on national tests. So when we look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the NAEP reading test, the scores of Black and white fourth graders had an achievement gap of 26 percentage points. And we see that both with reading and both with math. And we've also seen in Minnesota that over the last 5 years, the math achievement gap on our state test scores has widened by 2 percentage points in grade 4 and nearly 2 percentage points in grade 8. And then this gap, though, what's also concerning is it's paired with declining test scores for both white and Black students in Minnesota. So again, student performance is stagnant, it's in decline, our gap isn't budging. And I should also note that in my report, I talk about gap closures going in the wrong direction. So if we look at third grade reading proficiency, we see that maybe the gap between white and Black students in 2015 can be calculated as a certain percentage, and the gap in 2019 between these same groups of students is smaller. But that's not because both groups of students are improving and becoming proficient readers. It's because white student scores are in decline and Black students' scores have barely moved. And so something is going on, something is not working, no matter how much money we throw at the problem, because there has been so much research to show over the years that how you spend money matters far more than how much you spend. And there are several other states that are outperforming Minnesota and serving their students of color better. I think of Mississippi. You mentioned Mississippi. Mississippi Black and Hispanic students outperform Minnesota Black and Hispanic students in both math and reading. And Mississippi serves a larger student body of Black students than Minnesota. So we obviously have some things to figure out with our education system, and just more money is clearly not the solution.
Well, I think some of it, without me even doing any research, based on what I know, when you start defocusing reading, math, history, civics, and you start focusing more on social justice and history and how and white privilege and how racism and stuff, of course you're going to turn out students of all races and backgrounds and demographics who know less about that. Now they'll be able to tell you about social justice and things like that, but they won't be able to read. In fact, this is a good time for me to say why one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this subject. Like I said, we were running a small company that taught inner city children to improve their reading and some science and math and stuff like that. And this one young ninth grade female, beautiful young lady, full of energy, came in the ninth grade, and we did a reading assessment, and she was reading at the first grade level, and that just broke my heart, and my heart is still broken behind it. And I'm not as careful to not to offend anybody in this area, because there's a lot of people need to be offended here and need to be held responsible and accountable for it. So I broached some of the changes that's going on in the field of education, and we're going to talk about this whole woke revolution, and then we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. I think is this whole critical race theory. So in our public school system, and even some of our private schools and colleges and things, just our whole education system, they've come up with this whole idea of critical race theory that's affecting curriculum and de-emphasizing certain things. And basically, as I see it, our children are already performing way below efficiency level in just about every other area. And the leadership in education, they've run out of excuses of explaining it. So now what they're going to do is give us a double whammy. Your kids don't know anything, but listen to us people. The reason they don't know anything is because of discrimination and racism and history and the history of America. And that just upsets me more because I know what our children can do when we get rid of, boy, I don't know, in other words, when we get rid of that kind of foolishness about that's involved in critical race theory. So give us some information about what you've seen and what you see coming down the road in our schools, and what are the challenges for us who don't want to have the negative impact of critical race theory in our educational institutions.
Right, the negative impact and also the very limiting lens that students are now being taught to view themselves and society through. It's extremely limiting.
It is.
And so we've really seen with critical race theory that it's fast becoming America's new institutional orthodoxy. And it's being implemented everywhere. And I focus particularly on how it's popping up in education. And I think it's important to note that critical race theory has been around for a while as an academic discipline. It branched off of critical theory, critical legal theory, which says basically that all of society should be looked at and understood through the lens of identity politics. So there have been academics and other scholars who have written about it for a while, but we've really seen it seemingly appear to pop out of nowhere recently. And that's because it is being taken and applied now in very concerning ways that have parents from all backgrounds and across the political spectrum concerned. And when you look into the political premises of CRT, that is where the concern starts, right? Because critical race theory, it builds on this intellectual framework of class-based Marxism, which focused on class conflict. And so CRT is being rebranded as race-based Marxism, identity-based Marxism, this whole idea of white versus black, that you have simplistic groupings that label people as the oppressed or the oppressor. And this, of course, pits different groups of people against each other. It's very divisive. And then, as you noted, CRT also views all systems in society through a lens that they were built on oppression, that the idea of that racism is everywhere, that it's embedded in every single part of all systems. And so we have to completely uproot all institutions and founding principles of America and destroy those things, that whether that's the culture, the ideas, the institutions, and really replace them with a racial hierarchy in which entire racial groups are either monolithically good or bad. And so it's important to note that where we're at right now with CRT, it's more than just an academic debate. There are efforts to take critical race theory and turn it into really a revolution that changes society culturally and socially.
Yeah, and the interesting part about it, you mentioned Marxism and stuff. We've tried that before, and somehow we don't seem to have learned our lesson. And you're right, because it's become in a large part of the corporate culture. Even here, it's sneaked its way into the Department of Defense and all areas, and I'm just concerned about it because I see what it does to our community when you relieve people of personal responsibility and personal accountability. And I've seen what personal responsibility and personal accountability does when you instill that in people. And I got experience with it, working with our young people, and they welcome it openly. Say, I'm going to hold you accountable. I don't want to hear about society and history and all that stuff. This is what you need to do. And I just get such great responses from our young people when I do that, or even in the barbershop like I was today. Got some great responses on personal responsibility and accountability. And I think that's an opportunity for us to present that to people, because really, you really feel good about yourself when you're meeting your responsibilities and you're being accountable. And even though it's hard work, and look, there's a lot of little dots we connect with this, but You know, if you're feeling good about yourself, you're less likely to go out there and hurt other people and commit crime and things like that. So I just have a very serious problem with this whole critical race theory, and I hope that enough of our people don't get fooled and doped by this. I don't even want to call it that, but this. No, it's like defunding the police. It's nonsense. I mean, it's just total nonsense. Okay, so what do we need to do? Well, let's back up a second. So the critical race theory, as far as education is concerned, the CRT, is having an impact on our curricula also. Explain to our audience and parents out there who have children in the school system, what are the type of things going on with curricula in our schools and our colleges that we really should be aware of and take the appropriate steps on?
Right. Awareness is the first key step, but getting that parents to recognize what critical race theory looks like is also important, because when I talk about how we're seeing it kind of creep into education and standards and curriculum, all critical race theory inspired efforts aren't going to just be called critical race theory. And that is because Marxism and neo-Marxism is a hard sell with people. Like you said, we've seen countries that have tried it and have failed at it. So critical race theorists are really masters of language, and they use a series of euphemisms to describe CRT, such as equity, diversity, inclusion, social justice, words that sound non-threatening and that would make anyone who opposes that seem ridiculous, right? We all want students to feel included. We want to celebrate diversity. But the problem is that these words don't get at the political premises of CRT. And that is what is very concerning about how we see CRT in real world application. And so the three ways that we're seeing these CRT inspired ideas creep into schools is through race essentialism, collective guilt, and neo-segregation. And so whether that's staff meetings in Minneapolis public schools that I've been told by teachers have been segregated into one staff meeting for staff of color, one staff meeting for white staff, whether that's books, children's books that children are reading that tell them, all police officers only like white people, they don't like black men. All of these are the very limited lens through which critical race theorists and its supporters want children to view themselves and the world. And so for parents to get involved, they have to recognize what this looks like and how it pops up, because it's not going to be always blatantly out there. It's going to be very subtle. And we've seen kind of the trickle down effect from CRT being injected into higher education and now coming into K-12 education. So one way, though, that we're seeing some of this language and this push for multiple perspectives, even though it's really only one perspective, coming down the pipeline is through our state's social studies standards revisions that are currently underway. And this is a process that the Department of Ed and its handpicked social studies committee, the Department of Ed, obviously with Governor Walz's Department of Ed, they're using the social studies revision process to replace academic knowledge and skills with the cultivation of politically correct attitudes and views. And it's very concerning, because this will shape how students learn about social studies for the next 10 years of their life. So parents can get involved in the feedback period for the social studies standards revision process. American Experiment has followed that closely at raiseourstandardsmn.com. And then once those standards are approved, they'll go to the school board, the local school board, and that school board will be involved in textbook selection, curriculum selection. And so it's really important for parents to get involved at the local level as well, because what textbook is selected will frame whether or not students learn a revisionist history or a complete and actual history, warts and all, of America's faults and failures, but a history that doesn't stop there, right? That doesn't keep students in this victimhood view of themselves.
Right. And, you know, I've been very upfront about my distaste for CRT. But, you know, once again, I'm a results-oriented person. And I might be a find it a little distasteful if it was actually improving our reading proficiency, our math proficiency. But as we talked about earlier, not only is it not improving, it's in a lot of cases going down, and the other wider population across the board, those type of proficiencies going down, uh, have a downward trend, and there is a connection there. We talked about curricula a little bit. There is, and I haven't really done my homework in this area, but I am aware enough to know that they are doing some things with sex education curricula here in Minnesota. Do you know anything about that, Catrin? And what can you tell us about that? Which sounded scary to me also. But what do you know about that, and what can you tell us about that?
That is a bit concerning as well. That there was legislation for that at the legislature that hasn't gone anywhere. There was a House bill, but there was no Senate companion. The American Experiment has looked into it a little bit, but I would direct individuals to the Child Protection League (CPL). They've really
Okay.
dug into what the sex education, comprehensive sex education as it's being called, would teach children, the books that are being used, which are endorsed by Planned Parenthood and that sort of thing. And so they have really followed that well, and have great resources for parents wanting to learn more specifically about the push for it. But I will note that many parents may not be aware that they can opt their child out of health education, sex education. And so American Experiment is working on providing parents those resources so they can access the opt-out form, because based on Minnesota state law, a parent has the right to notify their school's principal and say, my child will not participate in this sex health education class and will have to receive alternative materials instead to complete. So that is an option for parents to be aware of as well. But I would encourage them to check out the Child Protection League if they want to learn more specifically about that
Oh, okay.
curriculum.
And I'm going to check that out also, because I saw some documentation on it, and if it's true, I just couldn't believe it. What they were planning on teaching children in elementary school, and once again, to be 100 on with everyone. And I mentioned our educational system. When I was growing up, I just remembered in the ninth grade, as a matter of fact, Jim, our coaches showed us a film of a childbirth. And at the ninth grade, that kind of was freaking me out, and I didn't know exactly how to handle that. And I can imagine what it's going to do to our children who are in elementary school, and the type of stuff that I saw that they were planning on doing. So, what we've been talking about, I think, Catrin, and in a way, is there's some type of indoctrination that's been going on, and people, and it's subtle unless you really know what's going on. I mean, when you find young people, and I don't want to sound like I am an old school guy though, and I do respect generational differences, but when you hear some of the young people talking about things like defunding the police and critical race theory, and the indoctrination that they're going through, it gets kind of scary. And it's no wonder that when you put in uh, gen- uh, leadership from a certain generation that's been indoctrinated with this stuff from day one, in education, in the media, in pop culture, everywhere around. And to be honest with you, I've played good attention to my children growing up, but I have one in that 30ish range, and they even got to him. I mean, some of the things that he believes, I'm just like, wow. And to be honest with you, looking back on it, and you have to understand, we're from a culture where parents are in control; they're the authority. You don't come home. I would never dare have come home and try to tell my mom and dad what the teacher said was right and wrong. And just looking back on it, I just realized that when some of my children was growing up, they come home and tell me, well, the teacher say this is right, you shouldn't be doing this, and that really was the signal a lot of times. And so it's really I think it's screwed up a whole generation, and I'm concerned where we're headed with the country. And like you said, it's just so subtle, and that's why when you got a leadership from a certain generation. They think the answer to is to defund the police and all that kind of. Boy, I'm trying to stay away from the word silliness, but I'm finding it hard to do. That's why you find all that, and I don't know how do we. I guess, Catherine, when you think about it, can we turn back the tide on that? We looking into the future where we got all these woke people with all these crazy ideas that's going to harm, and my concern is harming my community, and I know I know it's going to harm my community. Is there any way to head this off or reduce the impact of it? Or are we uh, in the Alamo here, and we got to fight our way out or something? What do you think about that, Catherine?
We're definitely in an uphill battle, right? And I would like to have hope that we can turn this around. I believe that we have truth on our sides, and truth prevails through darkness. And I think that really pushing back against critical race theory and all it's about has to come down to messaging, language, the use of stories. Stories and examples are extremely powerful of parents and students who are facing this in real world experiences. So that real world application piece is key. And really help America understand that no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, pushing back against this is is realizing that teaching children to disregard character and to measure people's relative worth on the basis of skin color or sex or other variable characteristics doesn't create a healthy environment. It doesn't help children develop into good citizens. It doesn't help us do the hard work of restoring and reconciling society. And so we can all unite around that. And I think that communities who have engaged in grassroots activism, who have reached out to local school boards, are a key vessel in pushing back on this and standing up for all students. Now, this isn't obviously to say that racism doesn't exist, or that we should not teach that racism is wrong, or that we should not teach an honest assessment of our history. When our history is told well, it doesn't omit America's faults. But how, again, critical race theory does this, it's not done in an appropriate manner. It's done in a way that harms children intellectually and psychologically, and really pushes them to view their self-conception in a limited way and that of society. And when we divide society and don't emphasize our common humanity and focus on tribalism instead, we actually reject all of the methods and the goals of the civil rights movement. We call things into question like equality, rationalism, and human rights that really should unite us all as Americans. And so I think continuing to hone in on the key ideas and political premises of CRT, and then how we're seeing it in action, because stories are powerful. And I'm hopeful that that will show individuals that you can have good intentions, right, with supporting critical race theory and wanting to address racism. But we all know that even good intentions lead to bad ideas. And these bad ideas are harming our future generation of leaders.
So, on in that area, and I'm going to put out an honest challenge to anyone out there who are proponents of critical race theory to come on my show and let's discuss it. Uh, I'm challenging anyone in this country who's in charge of public education to come on and let's discuss how it's educating certain children from communities of color in inner city and poor children communities. And I think I can expose them for the incompetent approach that they're taking and why these issues aren't getting any better in these communities and why, as you pointed out, they're going to keep getting worse. And that is not, as we talked about, related to the amount of money you're receiving and all these other things that you want to distract us on. It has to do with your mindset as a leader in educating these children. And once again, I'm speaking from experience. And I know our children can learn and perform in all areas of human endeavor. just like any other children. I don't care what kind of rich community you're from or whatever. And I know that we can educate our children without excuses. And it doesn't matter whether, and because every time I hear an educator talk about we need more parent involvement to educate these children, I'm like, you don't get it. Because I know that there are some parents out there right now that can't be involved. And you should be able to educate those children anyway. And I'm saying to all of those out there with your PhDs, and I've talked to a lot of them that's teaching out administrators, our principals out there, give me those children that you say that's failing. Give me that money. Once again, the school choice. And I will guarantee I will educate these children. In fact, I'll go even further. Give me the children the money and a chalkboard and a piece of chalk. And I'll educate every one of them better than you're doing. And when I say educate, I mean, when you graduate from high school, you're reading at a high school level. When you graduate from high school, you are no math at a high school level. Right now, that is not going on. So I challenge everyone out there, and once again, especially in Minnesota, including our governor, I call him our educator in chief. When he leaves office, it's going to be even worse. The education achievement gap, when they leave office, is going to be even worse. And I predict that. Anyway, I didn't mean to get on my soapbox there, but I see the impact that it's having on our community. And the sad part about it, when you start off with an achievement gap, it leads to a life achievement gap. When you start off with an education achievement, it leads to a life achievement gap. And then we got these people rigging all these false reasons and excuses where the achievement gap is there. Now, a lot of it lies on you for not educating our children properly. But there's other things. So anyway, I had to get on a soapbox there and get that out of my system because it's dear to me and I just love our children. So, and I hate it when people aren't doing their jobs in educating our children. And we as voters, and we don't hold them accountable either. We keep putting the same type of people in there. And I'm not going to get into politics and stuff like that. We keep putting the same type of people in charge of these things. And we keep getting worse results. And voters just keep putting them in there. And so I'm just upset about that. And I know our audience needs to know that. Okay. So this has been very, very wonderful, Catrin. We will have a follow-up. What I always like to have our guests do is comment on any area that you wanted to comment on, but I was not smart enough as a host to bring it up. Do you have any of those such areas, Catrin?
I'd actually just like to say a final remark on what we've been talking about with critical race theory and that sort of thing. And that is that it's personal for me in the sense that my husband is Black, my child will be of mixed race. And so I would hate to have my child be in an education system that would teach him that I am an oppressor and that his father is oppressed, that would limit his dad, and say that his identity begins with his skin color. That's the most important thing about himself. And so there are a lot of individuals who recognize that these ideas are harmful and want to stand up for all students, and realizing that we can and must hold students to a high bar of excellence. That is something that we are lacking on in our education system, and it's leaving students behind and really doing a disservice to them and the future role that they'll play in society.
Yeah. Well, I tell people that I ended here, when the people that raised me, they did not talk to me about those type of things. All the obstacles in life and the racist people out there and the horrible things that happen to people out. What they had me focus on is me being the best person I could be and being responsible and accountable. And I thank God that that's what they did, because I feel for our children nowadays when all they hear all day, every day, where because of your skin color, you can't do this, you aren't going to make it, and the whole world is stacked against you. And that's what they hear. And I see when they hear a different message, just a change in the looks where, hey, look, in America, you can be whatever you want to be. And I'm here to tell you how to do it. And no, it's not going to always be fair. It's not always going to be easy. Not going to testify about that. But in the long run, you can basically, and once again, as a techie, we know there's nothing that's 100%. There's always that odd percentage, small percentage that happen. But generally speaking, if you set your goals, you work hard, you're committed, you're tenacious, and you're willing to put in the time and the sacrifice, and I'm a testimony, and the people I grew up with are a testimony to that. You can achieve in this country, in life, in the world, and that's the message I like to always give to our children. And it has been such a powerful thing for our children. And I tell people, you can see almost a smile come on their face when they hear that from someone who believes in them, who care for them, and who's not giving them an excuse about the world is bad and full of bad people. So once again, Catrin, I really appreciate your time here. Good luck on your newborn baby boy. I hope he's born on September 2nd, but even if it's not, I hope he's a Virgo. And we will be talking to you soon. And and by the way, make sure you send me a picture of this young man once he's born. I'm gonna hold you to that and say hi to your husband and congratulations again. And thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Lacey. This has been great, and
Yeah.
hope to come back.
Yeah. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.